In this video, I'm going to be walking you through 10 different tips to improve your wildlife photography. So with that being said, let's start with number one, and that is to learn to walk quietly. And this will save you a ton of hassle in the wildlife world. So if there's a bird, learning how to walk carefully up to it, or even just a deer or moose or whatever you're shooting, if you can make as little sound as possible, you will get much better results. And the number one tip I have for this is to learn to walk heel to toe very carefully, and also bend your knees when you walk. You're also going to want to make sure you're not having loud clothing. For example, crinkly stuff like this jacket is pretty crinkly, so this wouldn't be a great shirt for wildlife photography. Generally, anything with flannel is going to be much more quiet, or suede or softer-esque materials. You're also going to want to make sure all of your gear is prepared and ready to go. So don't keep your camera in your backpack if you're walking up, so when you get close to the animal, you're going to have to take it out. You want it to be in your hand, ready to go. You don't want to have to be taking off lenses. You just want everything to be quiet and ready to shoot. So learn to walk quietly. If you want to get better at this, try hanging out with some hunters. So I have a couple friends that like to hunt elk, and I will go out with them occasion and just hang out and learn how to walk quietly and learn how they inspect a scene. It's a great way to learn how to approach shooting wildlife. The second tip I have is to wait for the animal to look up. So generally when you find animals in nature, 99% of the time they're going to be eating something. So this is not when you want to get a shot of them. Additionally, you also don't want a shot of them with their butt facing you. The perfect shot would be the animal is attentive for some reason and they are facing in your general direction. So wait for something to happen. So wait for the animal to perk its head up and look around. That's a great opportunity for a shot. Wait for it to start flapping its wings, to start moving, to start running. Look at interactions with other animals. So if you see a mama bear with baby cubs, wait for it to interact with those cubs in some way. And this is how you're going to get a much more dynamic and interesting shot than just an animal grazing, for example. And this is going to take quite a bit of patience. So my general strategy is you just wait, and the moment the animal perks its head up, you have your camera in burst mode, take a bunch of shots, wait for it to go down, rinse and repeat over and over again. The third tip I have is to learn to compose scenes quickly. So a lot of things in wildlife happen very fast, and it's very similar to street photography. So if you want to get good at shooting wildlife, try going out in the street and shooting people that are walking around in the city. Another good technique to learn how to compose quickly is to sit in the passenger seat of a moving car. And while it's driving, see a subject as it appears, have your long lens out, and try and shoot it and compose that shot while you're moving in the car. It's a great way to start timing your reflexes to get much faster at things happening and learn how to compose quickly. The good thing about wildlife photography, though, is that the animal is always going to be the subject. So you never have to waste time trying to figure out what the subject might be, for example, in landscape photography. Whereas in wildlife, you just have to figure out how to support that subject. So what are the elements around it that are going to make that shot look good? The fourth tip I have is to use a 200mm plus lens. So anything in the super telephoto range is going to get you much better results. Even with a 200, I often struggle to get a lot of animals that are far away. For example, when shooting bears, you generally want to be really far away, and even with a fairly high megapixel camera, cutting and cropping out a little corner isn't the best because you're not going to be able to blow up those shots. So having a ideally 400 to 600mm lens will get you very far in the landscape photography world. And if you only have a 200mm lens, there are things called teleconverters out there, which you can check if they work with your camera and your lens. Essentially what they do is they add either a 1.5 or a 2 times magnification to your lens. Usually they're a couple $100 and they can be a lot cheaper than buying an entire 600mm lens. So you essentially strap them in front of the lens when it's attached to the sensor on your camera, and it just adds that magnification. The fifth tip I have is to watch out for depth of focus. So especially if you're shooting an animal that's very close to you. So for example, I was shooting these small sea turtles on the beach, and one thing I realized is that when you are adjusting or shooting at 2.8 or even 1.8 with a 50mm lens, when it's very close, that depth of field is gonna be very narrow. So making sure you get what is in focus is very important. So if an animal is very close to you and you're shooting with a very narrow depth of field, you're gonna wanna bump it up to like f4 or something just to make sure the entire head's in focus. For example, you might just get the nose in focus, but not the eyes. So you just really gotta be careful about depth of focus at a close range. Speaking of depth of focus at a close range, the sixth tip I have is to focus on the eyes. So with animals, if the animal is going to be close to you in any method, way, shape, or form, you want the focus to be on the eyes. So this is very similar to portraits with humans. You always want the eye in focus. Obviously, if it's 100 meters away, it's not gonna matter too much because you're gonna have the whole animal in focus. But if it's close enough to you or you're zooming in enough, always get the eye in focus. The seventh tip I have is to study the subject and its habitat. So if you're really trying to get serious about wildlife photography, you're gonna slowly learn that the more prized photos are the ones of more rare animals or very colorful or dynamic animals that you don't see every day. So in order to capture these animals, you're going to have to study how they behave. So you can do this either by researching them online, figuring out when they come out, where they generally hang out, and just by spending a lot of time in nature, observing them and seeing what their social patterns are. So wildlife photography can take a lot of time. It's not simply you show up, get a sunset photo and leave. A lot of times you have to learn how an animal works in order to be able to capture a scene that's going to be interesting to the viewer. My eighth tip is to hire local guides. So this is a great way to shortcut the previous tip. So if wherever you're traveling to, you can usually find someone that will take you on a jungle tour or a safari or a penguin tour or whatever. And these people are going to be the experts in the animals, so they're gonna cut out that entire process of having to learn how to find them. You can simply hire these people, they'll take you to the best spot for the animals at the best time, and you'll have the most amount of success with shooting that animal. So if you're bent on time and you really wanna get a photo of a certain animal, hiring the local guides is a great way to do this. And if you pay them a little bit extra, you can generally get them to take you to more abstract locations as well. So even if you're just looking for good landscapes, you can ask them for tips on good landscapes in the area that are generally unknown to the public. So utilize the local guides if you can find them. The ninth tip I have is to use blinds if they are available. So a popular term in the hunting world is blinds. And blinds are little houses or small cabins that are made up for you to wait in while an animal walks through. So this ensures that they don't see you, they won't hear you, and you could generally have an elevated position on them to get a good shot of them. So the same theory applies very well to photography. So if you can find blinds in a certain area, it's a good place to wait out for certain animals to come without having to worry about noise and being able to be comfortable while you're waiting for them to arrive. The 10th tip I have is to look into camera traps. And camera traps are essentially certain cameras you can buy that you could rig onto trees, and they will automatically take photos when they detect movement in a scene. So there's a lot of photographers at National Geographic who use this technique, especially for the very rare animals, so that they could hide pretty far away from them and get a good shot of it if it shows up. And there's also ways to rig your own personal cameras in order to do this. It takes a little bit of MacGyvering, but you could figure out ways to have an external power source connected to that camera, perhaps have an external shutter, and find ways to remotely take that photo to get the shot. So if you're very, very serious about wildlife photography, this is the steps you're going to have to take to get some of those more rare shots. So those are my 10 tips about wildlife photography. And the important thing is to also respect them. So, don't try and bait them, don't try and feed them, don't bother them, just, observe and walk away with a good photo. So let's go ahead and hop into the next video.